The world, and indeed Africa, is waiting to see what the new administration in the U.S. will bring. Let's get some more insights from Professor Isike, Professor of African Politics and Development at the University of Pretoria, and he joins us via Zoom from Pretoria. Professor Isike, for the last 4 years, Africa's relationship with the U.S. has not been the greatest. I mean, we've had President Donald Trump insult African countries. He introduced travel bans and immigration policies that disproportionately affected African students, and he favored doing business with individual countries as opposed to a more multilateral orientation. So looking back, how did all of these policies affect the continent?
Well, good day to you, and thanks for having me. Indeed, President Trump had a very Africa-averse administration, and ideally, this should have served as a reality check on the continent and its leaders, especially to get their acts right, but it did not. Instead, Trump's isolation of Africa may have actually helped to embolden dictators, especially given his assault on U.S. democracy and multilateralism globally. So, for instance, we see how democracy has recently been assaulted in a country like Uganda, and when the president of Uganda, Museveni, referenced the U.S. and its democratic systems in many ways. Well, so I'm hoping that President-elect Biden's election, helps to restore confidence in democracy and democratic processes, especially at a time when the African continent is currently, undergoing political shifts as well.
Right. And just to pick up from where you've left, of course, Joe Biden is being inaugurated today as the 46th president of the United States. You did talk about your hope, talking about democracy for the continent, but what more can Africa expect from his administration?
Well, let me say that every U.S. administration acts in line with the country's national interest. And although a president does have some leverage in influencing, U.S. foreign policy in particular directions based on their personal idiosyncrasies, as we saw with Donald Trump, the core national, interest focus of American foreign policy always remains the same. So this is in part because of the institutionalized nature of its foreign policy. So therefore, Africa should not really expect too much in terms of what it can benefit, okay? However, we can expect to see a few shifts, from Trump's foreign policy posture towards the continent, which will have different implications for us. So, for example, Joe Biden is very likely to renew the African Growth and Opportunity Act when it expires. This is something Trump has signaled he was not going to be renewing. Countries such as South Africa benefit greatly from the AGOA in spite of its limitations. He's also expected to push for a big stimulus package, which will have trickle-down effects on Africa, given that China will benefit and China will come down to the continent for raw materials. President Biden is also poised to restore the spirit of multilateralism and upholding democratic values and human rights in its relations with Africa. The triumph of democracy and Biden's seeming resolve to address systemic racism in the U.S. will affect how he relates with the continent and how African leaders will behave as well. So these are some of the things that one can expect to see from a Biden foreign policy posture, which is less averse to the continent.
Well, there is some sentiment from the continent that most U.S. administrations appoint individuals who recycle the same old thinking about Africa. Is the continent doing enough to change the way the U.S. engages with Africa?
Well, to start with, if Africa wants the way the world sees and engages with it to change, Africa must first reinvent itself. Then the world will be forced to see it differently and engage with it as such. Africa needs to do more. So to answer your question directly, Africa is not doing enough. It needs to do more, than sit back and expect the US in this instance, to change its perception of the continent. As I said just now, the US acts in its national interest always, irrespective of which administration or party is in power at any particular point in time. So Africa must look at itself and define its own interests first as individual states, then as a region, and then act in line with these interests and the world, including the US, would have little choice but to engage with it on its own terms. So, for example, the Continental Free Trade Agreement presents a good opportunity for the continent to act in its own interest by trading within itself and setting the terms of the trade with the rest of the world, including the US and China, as the case may be.
All right, Professor Chris Isike, thank you very much for your time.